Right. So he said one thing that he can say based on the earlier meetings is that audience is extremely interactive, especially when it comes to Q&A session. So I thought I'll do a Q&A session first. And I'll ask the questions. And some of you will answer. And then I'll build on some of that as part of my topic for today. And obviously, we won't have time all evening to get to talk to everybody. As someone says, every person has a story in themselves. And everybody can be at a center stage and can talk on many topics. And today's topic is something that will touch everybody. You know, when Chandrasekhar was talking to me some time ago and said that we would like to come and talk this year also. And this year's theme for the HMA is about building resilient organizations, which is very apt given the level of uncertainty that exists in the world today. So while he said, no, you can come and talk about agriculture, sustainability, many things, I said, okay, well, we have a theme of building resilient organization for the year, while sustainability is also linked to resilience in some form. What struck me is that, okay, while organizations can be resilient, it's important that individuals are also resilient. Possibly even before organizations become resilient. And when I said it, I had no idea what it actually means. But I only knew that individuals will definitely need to be resilient before organizations become resilient. So I thought I'll just get a little input from some of you who will volunteer for this opening Q&A session. I'm sure we'll have some time for Q&A at the end also, when the role can reverse and you can still ask questions and I'll see what I can respond as answer to that. But my first question is, why is individual resilience important? And I'll mention, I have 3 questions in mind. I'll ask all 3 of them and then you can think who would volunteer to answer 1, 2nd, and the 3rd question. The second is, what will make us resilient as individuals? It may be for the first one, second one, and possibly the 3rd one also. It can be just 1-word answer, 1 sentence answer. Saying that why is resilient important? You can just have 1 phrase, 1 word or whatever, so we can just get more people to respond so that we get a sense of the house. And the second one is, what will make us resilient? That's important. And third possibly can be a little more extended answer, is if any of you would like to also volunteer and pull out some instance, some anecdote and say that, no, which will cover both the first and second, and say that, no, this is how my resilience came to the fore in my own thinking. This is how I was resilient. So these are the 3 questions. So why is resilience important? Who may want to go first? So I can 3. So let me go with him first and say, why is resilience important?
Because I think my voice is too loud.
No, I think it will still be useful to have a mic. Almost everybody says, can you speak? My voice is very loud, I can speak. And without exception, but still I think.
Sir, I am very resilient on this.
Yeah, please go.
Practically in every phase of life, if we are not resilient, then we cannot face the reality. Because reality is always challenging. There are ups and downs. There are different kind of situations that comes to us. So as long as we are not resilient to different kind of situations, odds and evils, obstacles and challenges, then finally we cannot meet the goal, or today the professional success cannot be met. But at the same time, resilience is a relative term. It is not an independent term. This is what I feel resilience is very much important to really grow and achieve the goal of life. Like Arjun, the way he resilient, the rest of the people were also there. But the way he came only with one focus and the resilience, and finally he won it. That is what I feel.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. And maybe I'll go with one more. Yeah, since Mike is closest to him, let me take him for the same first question.
Thank you, sir. I'm Shiva. Uh, Life is full of uncertainties, sir. कल सुबह 5 बजे क्या होगा वो भी हम बोल नहीं सकते, sir. So we are, and as he said, it's all ups and downs, and things would come. Nothing is certain in the professional front or individual front. It could be health related, it could be career related, finance related. Nothing is like a smooth curve. When such situations happen, it's important for individual to endure, to be able to withstand against those odds and to move forward, sir. So resilience is very important.
Okay, great. So we'll move to the second question, and which is, although we heard part of it in the first question response itself in terms of what will make us really resilient. So if you have to look at what will make us resilient, second question, some volunteers for that. Yeah, so I'll go with him and two of you. Yeah.
And I'll keep it very short, just one word: believe in yourself.
So belief in yourself is important, so maybe go with him.
Thank you very much. My name is Surya Jidigonda, and I will also go with one word: attitude. The attitude to be positive, to kind of like have a positive feeling, collaborate, growth. These are the kind of attitude. I think attitude is key for being resilient. So I'll keep it as attitude.
So great. Yeah, and
Adaptability is one.
adaptability is one more.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go back there.
You know your strength. Resilience is very important for everyone. They should know their strength to overcome the hardships they had in their life.
Yeah. One more is. Yes.
What makes an individual resilient? I think it's the values and why we are doing what we're doing. If you can understand that, I think it's very important and we can become resilient. Thank you.
Wonderful. We'll go with one more for this.
I consider a person should have a objective, or he must have a passion. If he has a passion, he can develop the resilience. It will be a goal. Thank you.
It's wonderful. We'll shift to the third question now. I think we've got a good array of what does it take. Very useful and wide section of answers. So now, the slightly longer possible, extend to a minute or whatever. So, who might want to actually talk about some anecdotes or some instances? One instance, you can take 2 or 3 and say, this is the kind of uncertainty, this is the kind of change, this is ups and downs or whatever that we heard from what, to the what's that we heard and therefore explain that as what may have happened briefly. Yeah.
So the third one is about the examples of resilience. I'll quote from my example of my life. The first thing I remember in my life is I wanted to ride on a bicycle. So my dad has a bicycle that had a rod on that, and I could not, ride it properly. I fell down many times. I got myself bruised, but I wanted to ride it, and I wanted the joy of riding it. And even though I fell many times, eventually, because others were able to ride it, why can't I ride it? So for the joy of riding the bicycle, and I rode it finally after many attempts. So the fall and the rise, the fall and the rise, the fall and the rise until I get there. So that is one example of the resilience. The second
Yeah,
example.
thank you. I think we'll move on. So I had multiple friends hands raised from here. The gentleman next to you. Yeah, let me go to him because already raised a few times. No, I think the same thing, like I said, everybody will say that, but that last person won't hear it.
My answer, good evening, everybody. My answer to your first question is that.
No, just the third question, your personal anecdote on explaining how you may have dealt with that resilience.
India has everything. India has everything. Only that we are not using our resources. Each person is a resource. If we study better, if you use our mind properly on doing something which is useful to others, India can become great.
Yeah, thank you. So any personal anecdote that someone else would like to, you want to just say? So with excusing all others, myself from not going with everybody else, we'll just go with this as the last, and you can quote your anecdote.
My personal experience with the National Dairy Development Board, where I think a lot of uncertainties in the cooperative environment when dairy industry was growing under the leadership of Dr. Kurian. I think a lot of ecosystem which is politically influenced and all. So we had to influence the boards who are the politically motivated individuals from various parts of the country. I think the organization stood strong and then made a lot of training initiatives, which I was also a part of it. And another initiative is the Ichopal initiative of ITC. I was fortunate to be associated with that. When it started, I think it was the farmers in the rural India. I think there are a lot of interests in the communities. So going beyond that, we were successful, and I was fortunate to be part of that. Without the resilience, then we would not have been successful in those initiatives. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So let me thank everybody and all others who also raised hands, but I couldn't go to everybody. Like I said, everybody has a story, and we can obviously go until very late and to uncover that we all can share with each other in terms of how one can be resilient, and throughout our own lives, we would have done it time and again. And so synthesizing some of these kind of thoughts which have already come, and since the time I said, okay, let me understand what does that resilience for individual mean, I put a few other thoughts together and relay that back to you, and hopefully we'll have some more time at the end to interact in the same manner. So I thought easiest way to put thoughts together is use the letters in resilience itself. One can start anywhere, but language is got so many words that
Particularly English.
no, so same goes with any other language for that matter, except that the way we have been trained post-British colonialism is that we end up thinking and speaking a lot more in English, but I'm sure every language has that words, and all of that is certainly possible. So we use resilience letter. So RESI and all that. So with that makes it 10 letters. So in a sense, therefore, if I'm putting it together, it's like 10 pieces to this resilience puzzle as to what will make us resilient, whether as individuals in our own personal lives, or as professionals in our business life, management, like whatever profession we are in, teaching, students, whatever in our professional side of life. And then I said, let me use that template to build this. And let me use that to refresh my memory. I scribbled and shot a picture of all of that. And it is so interesting that almost everything that has been said by different people is either part of it already, or I'm going to bake it in as I respond so that we know that it's in all of us in terms of how to make that resilient really come through. So first is R for responsive. You know, someone said you can't choose what happens to you, but you can certainly choose how you respond. So therefore, I picked up responsive as the first trait of trying to be resilient. And now, being responsive, ideally you should respond to the root cause of whatever that you're trying to respond to, and not to the symptom of something. And I was also taught before I said responsive, the other word that occurred to me for R is trying to be responsible. You are yourself responsible and not externalize things that someone else is responsible. Now, while driving from home to come here, if I hit traffic on the way and then it got me delayed in coming, you can always externalize and say that the traffic is a lot more today. And therefore, I'm not taking that responsibility to myself in trying to respond to that situation. So being responsible is also an integral part of being responsive. And therefore, how do I respond to that situation? Whether starting early is a response. That's within yourself in terms of how I can respond to that situation. As opposed to an outcome out of that underlying cause that might trigger a frustration. It might trigger anger. And all of us would have gone through something like that ourselves. Sometimes it does trigger even things like road rage. Why are people just driving all over the place, and why can't they just stick to the traffic lanes or do in the right direction or whatever? But all of that is still externalizing things. Saying, what is it that you can do? Any situation. A time on the road or traffic may be a trivial example, but that very well demonstrates in terms of where is the root cause and how do you react to a symptom and not the underlying. And therefore being responsive as the first element that I picked up. The second letter is E. And I said E for embracing change. You all talked about unpredictability and change. And again, you can externalize and say that change was not anticipated. And therefore, because you can't predict change all the time. Sometimes you can. Conventionally, we did more often when the change was more linear, change was more range bound. Even in a business context, building resilient organization context that you have for the theme for the year, we all made a plan for next year, next 5 years and all. It used to be one plan, saying that, okay, this is what this is how market is going to behave, this is how much market expansion will occur, this is how the government policy is likely to be. And Rajni looked at as a linear kind of a progress that will happen. A little later, you know, not just one, they can be range. Optimistically, this is where it can go, pessimistically, this is where it can go, and therefore, how do you do? Now, today, that is not anymore possible. You embrace change and see you need to be a lot more agile. You will get setbacks, you have the ups and downs that we talked about. And therefore, how do you really embrace change? The whole idea of embracing change was made very popular to embracing challenge. And how does one use a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset? If you looked at a linearity, if you looked at hit an obstacle, and therefore this is the end of the road, is the fixed mindset. Some of you would have read this book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, who was Stanford professor about 20 years ago. That growth mindset starts with embracing the challenge. And in this context, I am saying embracing change. Now, in embracing change, you have to pick three elements. One is, while change is occurring, there is always an example of someone who succeeded. If it so happens that I am the one who has not succeeded, I must take inspiration from someone who has succeeded. Some of us who operate in stock market rationalize by saying the whole market is down and therefore I haven't made money or I lost some money, it's okay. But when you see, doesn't matter whether the market has gone up or gone down, somebody has made money. Now, if you take inspiration for someone who's really succeeded, that will open up multiple avenues to you in terms of how do I therefore look at, and therefore inspiration is one part of that growth mindset. The other part of it is persistence, notwithstanding obstacles, notwithstanding setbacks, notwithstanding the failures. Again, somebody talked about it. Is that, as people said, either I win and therefore I won and succeeded, or I lost or I failed, I gained experience. Either way you gain. So what is the learning from the failure? Unless that is captured, then you are not succeeding. That is the second element. How do you persist notwithstanding obstacles? And even if there are setbacks and failures, how do you learn from there? Is another piece of that growth mindset. And third is the importance of effort. That, as opposed to fixed mindset as Carol talks, is that quite often a lot of people take it that, okay, it's not easy. Somebody is more intelligent or somebody is more lucky, and you again try and rationalize, and I can't learn something. You need that innate ability. But the growth mindset really says that if you put effort, there's nothing that you can't learn. And enough and more examples that you go back to the first point of inspire. How do you take inspiration from someone who has really done it? And so all of that is the element of how do you get that growth mindset to actually embrace change. And since Narendra brought up about Echopal and the resilience that went into it and using this embracing change, I can again quote an anecdote from there. When I first went this idea to a board, saying that no, there is an opportunity to bring computers to rural India. This was in 1999, so therefore it was somewhat early from the agri-techs of today's world that we talk over the last now more recent 10 years. At that time, those of you who are from that generation would recall that to get into a computer room, you have to remove the shoes and walk in because the dust, the computers are so sensitive. So now to take a computer into a dusty rural India and hope it will work, we have no idea it will work or not. Or the fact that where is it's not like today's 5G environment and broadband visibly available everywhere. But that was the time you get the opportunity to think about internet connectivity only when BSNL laid its next round of optic fiber in some places, and only behind that one can go and do it. Or you have to access satellite directly and put antenna like we all used to do our televisions in that era in terms of how to put up antenna and receive. And in an era when literacy was still a challenge. And how do you get people to work on computers when it was considered a specialized kind of, and so on and so forth. So I said, I don't know whether all of this will work or not. Please give me 50 lakhs of rupees. We'll try this out in a few places. And I'll come back in 6 months and say if it is going to work or not. Otherwise, all I have for a plan is 2 pages full of questions. And so it's not a today's trade that I start with questions, but in some sense it was always there. And interestingly, what happened next is what I want to use for this embracing change anecdote. So our chairman, at that time, Mr. Devesh was the chairman. He said, okay, after the whole conversation, why, what not, what, all this kind of stuff, but I'll give you 10 crores. 50 lakhs doesn't sound right. I said, but I don't need 10 crores. He said, okay, if you don't need, don't use it. But if you need it, you will have it. Because at the end of 50 lakhs of rupees or 6 months, what you're likely to come back with, back to the board, is yes, it has worked, or no, it has not. And very likely, in 6 months' time and whatever experiment that you're designing, it is very likely to be, given all the obstacles that you listed as part of the Q&A, you very likely will come back and say, no, it has not worked. That no, it has not worked at the end of 6 months with only few experiments is not a high enough investment for all the vision that you are painting. This is what it can do to the farmers, this is what it can do to the competitiveness of Indian agriculture, this is what it can do to ITC's business, and this is what it can do to reorganizing agriculture supply chain, and so on and so forth. You may need more money, but I want to give you a full-blooded try on how to make it work. Not come back and say, no, it has not worked at the end of some period. And that really got the whole persistence like I talked about. That I have money to last. Eventually we did need more money than 50 lakhs. We didn't need all the way back to 10 crores. We required about 2.5 crores to complete the experimentation. We started with 6 locations. That was too small. Then we had to go to about 50. Then that was not large enough experiment. We had to go to 100 locations, and then we had to go to 500 villages before we said, this is how we are going to make it work. whether it's a technical side of it, a human side of it, a business model side of it, a supply chain geography, whatever the elements that we needed to test. The opposition that was coming in from the traditional intermediaries, the regulations that were required to be changed from the agriculture marketing framework that existed, the number of pieces that needed to be reorganized and tested were one too many, and therefore it was somewhat more ambitious, and also partly a hesitation that typically you go with a plan and ask for money, and if you say go with a set of questions and ask for money, it's very unlike a corporate setup that you'll get money to do it. And therefore that anything which is likely to happen, I have no idea, but notwithstanding all that, I need to keep discovering answers. Is the growth mindset, and that's what embracing change is all about in building that resilience. The third, and some of that happens, and again, we heard that unless you have an objective, you won't get somewhere. And the third letter, S, I'm using for a sense of purpose. So you need that sense of purpose or objective or goal, depending on what time frame and what scope that you have, you can use to really be resilient. Now that sense of purpose is what keeps you motivated to face all the setbacks and still move forward. Without that objective, it is possible that you will give up at some stage. And therefore, that sense of purpose is very important. And that sense of purpose, longer term, bigger, that much better. And if that sense of purpose is a life purpose, that much better. As individuals, obviously, that life purpose is what really keeps us motivated to go that far. And how do you build a life purpose? The life purpose is quite often not something that is crafted by you. Like I was saying in one of the earlier lectures a few years ago, in the same forum, is when a heart rings a bell, you know that's a life purpose. You don't know when the heart will ring a bell. It's like love. As I say, love is blind, but it does. Basically, it means that the bell rings here. And not here because you're seeing, and not here because you're hearing, and not here because you're smelling. And you can't even describe. In a very similar manner, what's your life purpose is not something that you will decide. It will evolve. You can craft it as you go along. In my case, when I was an undergraduate student, many of you would either, typically in our case, we had two options. Either you pick up an NCC option or you go for NSS option. Today also, it's the same system possibly. And so I picked up NSS, and as part of that, had to go to a village to do an economic census. Essentially go around houses and estimate their source of income and how they're living. I did go to villages until then, but villages always meant for me, it was summer holidays and it was scenic beauty in villages because we are going back to West Godavari in Andhra. That means it's the whole Konaseema, what you see in movies all through, and then greenery and water and all of that. As opposed to that, this was a village in a Kannur district in one of those dryland areas. And in a sense, for the first time, I walked into the face of poverty. Not that I didn't know poverty, but I didn't realize that because there were people, whether you see drivers, laborers in the factory. I was in industrial township, so there are laborers in the factory and there are maids at home, but it never occurred that any of those people were poor because we're all seeing them also as family and you are engaged in all of that, but it never hit. But when you walked in for part of this census, it occurred that, okay, this is what poverty means. You don't have 2 spear meals a day. And how parents will forego their part of the food to ensure that children have food. And all of that, I didn't realize. Some of us would realize much earlier in the life and develop much better social senses and empathy much earlier. And some of that may not realize until later. And that's what happened to me during my undergrad days when I was doing this in that NSS project. And possibly the first bell rang in my heart at that time that if I have to do something in my life, it has to be doing something for the poor. As a broad idea that was there. As a couple of years later went on, I was to make a choice in my next schooling for my post-graduation. It so happened out of another unrelated incident that I chose Institute of Rural Management. Typically, for most people, this was a college called Silver Jubilee Government College, and it was set up by then Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, P.V. Narasimha Rao, for largely training people in social sciences, life sciences, liberal arts, and all of that. And most common people thereafter went for civil services, and which is one of the reasons I joined there, saying that no, why pick up a 3-year undergrad, because if you go through a 5-year program like in engineering, then it's much longer, and therefore let me go there. And then for various reasons in between, I decided I will not go for civil services. Then the next best option typically is get into one of the IIMs. And it so happened that in our senior batch, a lot more people got through into IIMs like every year. And IRMA, Institute of Rural Management, was set up for the first year at that time. And nobody could make it into that process. So this seems to be something which is tougher than IIMs. So I said, okay, as a entry, let me try that. At that time, it still didn't occur, creating this poverty with the rural management still. And I, of course, still also gave IIM exam saying that, okay, if I don't get through IRMA like my seniors, I'll have backup.
Sir, IRMA Jaipur?
IRMA in Anand.
Oh, sorry, Anand.
Jaipur came much later.
Yeah.
IRMA in Anand and NDDB that Narayan Rao talked about as an offshoot education institution for training for cooperatives and rural enterprises that was set up. And as I learned more about IRMA, and I saw that, okay, there is a very interesting fusion of rural with management. Until then, rural always got associated with rural development. Management always got associated with business management. And Dr. Kurian conceived of the idea of fusing these two and said rural management. Now that, as I read more about it and as I went through that process, it connected the other dot that I had of poverty, and it's okay, rural enterprise is a good solution to alleviate poverty. That dot got connected. And as part of the program, once I joined IRMA, many students come from urban areas and they have no idea rural, what it is like. So typically you are all sent to villages to live in a village for a month in the very early part of the program, so that you all are living and experiencing and have a first-hand empathy with what it means to be in a village and not just go for a visit and come back in the evening. And as part of that, I was living in the house of the local milk union secretary, because that was the NEDB set up and therefore easy access to live in somewhere that, in a district of Nalgonda here, in somebody's house. And that person was also a homeopathic doctor, he was also the local adult education teacher, he was also the local postmaster and a farmer, and many other things. He was so extremely entrepreneurial, he will be almost incredible for an urban person to think of how can somebody do all this. Not an uncommon place when you think of in rural itself. But what I realized at the end of that 1 month stay is that despite so much of entrepreneurial effort, despite so much of hard work, and despite the amount of risk that this person is taking and family and many such others doing their own manner, all this effort was like standing on a treadmill and running. The lives were not getting any better. And that is when, in a sense, the third dot got connected. And when I said life purpose, it evolved and got crafted a little bit better. And said, okay, how do you make markets work for the poor? Was something that, as a phrase, occurred to me at that point of time. I said, if there is one life purpose for me of my professional life now having joined IRMA, how do you make markets work for the poor? If I can contribute to that, that will be my life purpose in terms of a professional life. Now that's how, now when the first bell rang in my heart about walking into poverty, I had no clue. And as it happened next, of choosing IRMA for a very different reason and then living in somebody's home in a village for a very different kind of a context. And then it got built over time. And because that sense of purpose got linked up with the persistence that I talked about in each of all, then that got me going. So therefore, the point really here is S standing for sense of purpose. And if that exists and that purpose is possibly as large as life purpose for somebody, and then it can be subordinate elements of a larger goal and a smaller goal and a smaller objective and so on and so forth. It will give you energy to stay persistent and resilient all through. The next letter is I, and I am using for inner strength. Now, if that heart and passion and all of that link is there, then automatically you will develop that inner strength. Otherwise, all the time you would see is obstacles and why you can't go any further. And therefore, and inner strength comes when you are, again, somebody said, confidence, belief in yourself, optimism, attitude. All of these are the elements which go into that in terms of how do you develop that inner strength. Another link or connecting these dots is when I was working at Farmers Cooperative, my profile was read out. One of the phrases or words, again a fusion word, interestingly that caught my imagination, is a word called preneur. The first chairman of ITC, Ajit Haksar, had coined this word called preneur. And said that typically they are professional managers and they are entrepreneurs. But a professional manager working in ITC is a preneur, that you are a professional entrepreneur. You have to think and act like an entrepreneur while you are a professional manager as a trustee of the largest stakeholders that you are in was something that I had read at that point of time in a Business India magazine. In those days, we didn't have so many business magazines. Possibly the only business magazine that I was there was Business India. When I read it, this word again attracted me. And okay, eventually I said, okay, I'm thinking of another organization. I said, yeah, this seems to be it. But the reason I brought out that preneur is to essentially bring out this aspect of where does the inner strength come from? To link with that, if you're an entrepreneur, some of you are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are typically looking at, I won't stop until the outcome is achieved. Doesn't matter what the obstacles are along the way. And we'll not stop with externalizing. We talked about externalizing in the beginning. That, okay, because this happened, I can't do this. Versus saying it doesn't matter what it is, I will still make it happen. Now, that mindset is the entrepreneurial mindset. And now you combine that with a professional management, which is about organizing things and managing things and dealing with complexity in many of this, is how the inner strength really develops of dealing with of whatever scale and scope of the challenge that you are encountering. And that mindset of come what may, that goal. Somebody used the example of Arjuna in the beginning to say that, no, how do I get there when I again use Arjuna some other later. But that preneurial mindset is what really gives that inner strength to get to that outcome. L is the next letter. And this is when I'll get to that Arjuna anecdote again. L standing for lens for focusing. Now you can use a lens which is focusing on always negative setbacks, or lens of focusing on positives, lens at short term or lens at long term. Whatever the lens you will use for focusing is a very important element of this resilience. And again, somebody said belief and self-belief. The self-fulfilling prophecy, as it is called, is that you believe your efforts get directed like that, in that direction. Now, post-COVID, during COVID, many people lost jobs. And it happened to either ourselves or our friends or colleagues, and we all know people who went through at that point of time. Now this lens, using again from personal examples, I can say that there were friends who used the lens and said, okay, at this time and this age, I lost job, and therefore there is no future. Versus someone else who said, this is a blessing in disguise. Now, this is a great time for me to switch careers. I already worked for 25 years, and this is the only linear progress I was making. But this is a great opportunity for me to switch careers, and now there are so many other things are happening. Let me just move there. Now, whoever heard of things called creators economy? And whoever figured that any small reel can get you money, or whose small YouTube video can get you money, and you can make a big business out of it. A series of 5-set charts or podcasts or whatever. All of this is part of creators economy, for example. And so there, how do you really look at the lens of every single situation and therefore create that self-fulfilling prophecy of therefore what effort did I put in, therefore what kind of steps I'll take is what will then determine and build that resilience. What time is it now? Yeah. Looks like we won't have time for Q&A at the end. Good that I started with at the beginning, unless you don't mind delaying dinner by a little bit. But let me walk through the other five somewhat more quickly than the first five. We're just halfway through. I've done 5 of the 10-letter word. And in some sense, if these are what to do 5 letters, the second part, in some sense, is the how to do 5, very broadly. Yeah. So the second 5 you can take is more like a toolkit. So next letter you have is I. So one of the difficulty of having picked up this template of let me use these 10 letters is that I was coming more than once, E was coming more than once, so I had to really figure out a way to find new things to fit there. So I this time I use for introspection. Again, somebody talked about it. It is important that you are self-aware to build resilience. And that self-awareness comes out of introspection. And could be, we talked about, this is why I'm calling this a toolkit. Awareness could be the first point that I said. Are you responding to a stimulus, or are you responding to a stimulant, so to say? The root cause or the symptom. Now, all of this only at that point of time you will not realize. When you seeing somebody driving a wrong way, you might yell. Now, yelling may not solve the problem. If you say, I need to get to my destination safely in good time, yelling is the last thing which will help you. As part of that anger and frustration, it might actually make you also more offensive in your driving. So am I therefore responding to the root cause and being responsive to that is something when you reflect only you will know a little later. And that's part of introspection. And I also talked about the same our responsibility at that time. So are you taking responsibility of your own actions? Is also something that you need to, when you reflect, you will realize. Okay, not that not healing and suppressing is good. Even suppressing is bad. Acknowledging, accepting that the reaction could be like this also good part of this introspection. In fact, in some other template, this is called an ABC loop. So B is a behavior. Now, how you behave leads to C, which is a consequence. Now, whether your behavior is linked to an A, which is an antecedent or a root cause, will get you to the right consequence. If your behavior is only responding to a symptom, you will not get the right consequence. So, whether you use this template or an ABC loop for more easily to remember is that introspection that really helps. The next letter E, like I said, E has occurred more often. I'm using this time E for emotional capital. Now, from many comment that you all made at the beginning also, is emotional capital is the most critical aspect of building resilience for individuals. There is an emotional capital in the context of resilient organizations also, but for individuals it's even more important. In one of my earlier lectures and most common in one of my related topics, I talk about this human capital model of Professor Sumantra Ghoshal. He says the success is not just built on intellectual capital. and in the management and a business kind of a context that we are talking, if just intellectual capital was good enough, a bunch of Nobel laureates would have built the most successful businesses or corporations in the world. That's not good enough. Yeah, it's a necessary ingredient possibly, but a bias for action, which is one part of emotional capital, is important. And ability to deal with some of the things that we discussed earlier in terms of setbacks and take the ups and downs and all of that is a part of that emotional capital. And therefore, how do you strengthen that emotional capital is one of the elements of this toolkit. The next letter, N, was one I had most difficulty with. It was almost on my right coming here that I said, okay, let me use a proxy. I used N for ninja. Ninja, the Japanese. For lack of any other word that I can figure out with N. So, ninjas are martial artists, martial arts specialists, and they can do many different things. But in this context, I picked it up for the ability to bounce back. Somebody used that word bounce back also in the beginning. What resilience is all about? You fall down, you get up. That bouncing back is a key element of resilience. So if you are able to bounce back from a crisis, that's what resilience is all about. And since there was no B anywhere, I used N for ninja as a proxy for bouncing back. And how do you bounce back is many of the things that we just discussed. The tools include you acknowledge and accept a crisis. Don't externalize and rationalize as step one. We said you process and learn in terms of what happened and all of that. You reflect and learn. Whether you failed, you learn. You decode from somebody else's success and learn. So all of that or the other bit there. But more importantly, linking back to the immediate previous point of emotional capital, take action. You may learn, but if you don't act, it won't get you anywhere. And while acting, again going back to the earlier point, focus on the positive. So these are all the elements that will be ninjaic, so to say, to bounce back in the context of resilience. Now, as part of this bouncing back and emotional capital, I go to my next letter, C. And C I am using for community or a cohort, standing for a team or a family. So part of emotional resilience and emotional capital is that you may not be resilient by yourself all the time. How do you build that resilience together with your spouse or a sibling or a parent or a team member or a smaller community, so that you are able to really deal with any context, and therefore that even in the context of building resilience at an individual level, community is still, team is still, all of this, cohort, whichever manner you look, is quite an important feature. Because any resilient system is not resilient to everything. The most common, not an individual level, but the most common resilient system in the world is considered to be internet. Whatever may happen, internet is not down. Your own Wi-Fi may be down, or your own connectivity may be down, or But the internet is designed in such a manner as a distributed network that any attack, it is still robust. But at the same time, as we have come to discover as the years went by, it is also fragile because it's not robust and resilient for, let's say, a cyber attack. Systemically, if something gets attacked and then not necessarily the whole internet, but a much larger part of the network can get into that cyber attack. So how do you be both robust and fragile at the same time is an important feature that we learn from ecology, from biology, from many nature and nature-like elements, organisms. That how as an individual I really become resilient is a lot dependent on what community I am part of, what family I am part of, what team I am part of. And that's the context in which I'm using this C. Because in the same human capital model that I talked about it earlier, the third element, other than intellectual and emotional capital, is the social capital. Now, what social capital lets you do, and what is actually social capital before I talk about what social capital lets you do. What is social capital is who knows you and what can they do for you. And these are all dots that you're connecting through your life. That, and then you keep building that trust, which is what goes in as the credit in your account in any relationship. Therefore, when you tap it, then the other person says, okay, this is what you want, I can do it for you. I can't do it myself, but I know someone who can do it for you, let me tap you. And so on. That's what the social network is all about. And that's how the resilience gets built, even for individuals in that larger social context. And that's the C form. And the last letter, E once more. I was almost in two minds and said, okay, now one more E now. So I can stop with, instead of resilience, I'll make it resilient and stop with T for T and say that's it. But I said, okay, having started the resilience, let me plug in something. And I said, okay, now if everything is already consumed, the last recourse is to Bhagavad Gita. And I said, let me go there. And said, the last E stands for equanimity. As Sri Krishna says, okay, now I don't have the Sanskrit written here, but basically what it means, that don't get flustered in pain, not get attracted by pleasure. You'll have that stable wisdom, that equanimity, the ups and downs that we began the session with. In the up, don't get so excited that the only thing thereafter can be down. In the down, don't get so flustered that it will take you further down. And that balance, although let me use that E to end the resilience with. And so they are the 10 letters that I can present you. Thank you very much. So, with the permission of the president, you can see if I have your permission to